Hello, everyone. If I am live, I hope you guys are joining me today. We're going to elaborate, going to do, kind of a deep dive on the topic of Latin America and leftism and UNASUR, based a lot on this one interview done last week by Gregory Wilpert of the Real News. And the reason I use the Real News is that a lot of people might be wondering, they're not exactly a major media company, but they do represent a coherent perspective, one that I deeply disagree with, but one that nevertheless I think they at least pay attention to the topic. They might be completely distorting what's going on, but they pay attention to the topic. Another thing that I want to discuss is the fact, why is it that I, of all people, talk about Latin America? I mean, I haven't really traveled there. I know some people from there, but why would I focus on there? And why is more my focus not on the Middle East, which I have, to put it lightly, more experience with. I was actually discussing it with somebody this weekend. When you look at the Middle East and you have people try to form opinions on it, their bias typically comes out. They might have an anti-Muslim bias. They might have an anti-Jewish bias. They might have a bias where they say, the U.S. should be more interventionist. They might have a bias where they say the U.S. should not be intervening at all. And while I obviously, I don't think I fit firmly in any of those corners. I think that you do have to acknowledge that it's very difficult for people to observe the Middle East without taking a side, if they take an interest at all. So in Latin America, you don't have this massive religious or ethnic conflict over there. You don't have necessarily, to the same degree at least, a power race between the great world leaders, Russia, Iran, China, and the U.S. You don't have it with the same violence as you have in the Middle East. You have that competition, but it's simply not of the same intensity. And that's why I would rather talk a lot about Latin America than a topic where people really get riled up, such as, Palestine, or I would talk about Pakistan as well. There's not as much interest in Pakistan. There's not as much interest in Turkey, to be honest with you. So why do I get interested in Latin America? The fact of the matter is that if you observe what has happened in Latin America over several decades, the place has been a complete mess, largely because of abuse by states, by the state, the military, whichever side you pick. You could be a right winger or you could be a left winger. In virtually all of the Latin American countries, you have a state power that is basically imposing the vision of either a military dictator or some sort of demagogue, and it could be of either fashion. John Sislowski is asking if my email is available. My email actually is in the description, so you can look for it there, but I'll put it in the box here. But I don't know why they're trying to contact me by email necessarily, unless they have a topic idea. So we'll start off. A lot of people, they emphasize Venezuela. They'll emphasize of late. They'll emphasize some other countries like Brazil, to a lesser extent Argentina, and people who are more, libertarian or more free market oriented, such as myself. They'll emphasize that those are the exhibits of why socialism and state-run economies in Latin America have been a failure. But you don't have to look at recent times. And the reality is that if a country has a socialist leader, I don't think that it's doomed to have a complete and utter meltdown the way some of these other countries do. And I might get some shit thrown my way from either people on the right who will say, well, are you fucking kidding me? You've said the whole time, you're against socialism or whatever. And I might get some shit from people on the left who say, well, look who's admitting that we're right. No, I'm not saying you're right. If you look at certain countries in Latin America, El Salvador being one recent exhibit, they've had left-wing leadership that has not been quite as abusive as in other countries. And I think that is mainly a result of probably personal or local restraint on the part of the leaders, or a desire to remain at least, to maintain a good relationship with the outside world, where they're not trying to get El Salvador into a huge conflict with the United States. By the way, I think Mexico, with its new leader, AMLO, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, you could see him develop into one of those leaders. But let's talk about this video from a few days ago where they're discussing on the Real News UNASUR. And I actually have the transcript here handy. I might have to swing it out my way just so that I can at least follow along. So there you go. I have it by myself. And most of these links are already in the discussion. If you want the links later, just send me an email. But most of them are in this discussion, at least the video links. So let's go right ahead.
It's the Real News Network. I'm Greg Wilpert, coming to you from Quito, Ecuador. The Union of South American Nations, also known as UNASUR, seems to be in the process of disintegrating. Last April, 6 of the regional group's 12 member countries announced the suspension of their membership because of a lack of consensus over the appointment of a new Secretary General for the group. The 6 member countries suspending membership are all controlled by conservative governments: Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Argentina, Peru, and Paraguay. Then, last week, Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno, whose country hosts the organization's headquarters in Quito, said that UNASUR should turn over the building to Ecuador since it was not being properly used anymore. He followed that announcement up by saying that the building will be given to the indigenous organization CONAIE, which would house its university in the building. Joining me now to discuss the fate of UNASUR is Guillaume Long. Guillaume was foreign minister under Rafael Correa from 2016 to 2017, as well as Ecuador's ambassador to the UN in Geneva, but resigned last January because of political differences with the Moreno administration. Thanks for joining us again, Guillaume.
Thank you.
So UNASUR was launched back in 2008, almost exactly 10 years ago. And in some ways, people had this idea that it would be modeled a little bit after the European Union. And back then, most, but not all governments in the region had progressive governments. And it had important ambitions, such as the creation of a regional currency, a regional bank of the South, and major infrastructure projects. But what's the situation now? I mean, was the UNASUR project just a fair weather project that could only survive as long as there were progressive governments that were interested in regional integration? How do you make sense of its falling apart at this moment?
Oh, there's a few questions there, but yes, I think the falling apart of the UNASUR, which looks more and more increasingly likely, unfortunately, is highly symbolic of what's going on in Latin America. There's a real, not only a return of the right, but a real backlash against progressive forces pretty much everywhere in Latin America, with an emboldened sort of geopolitical return of the United States, trying to get back in its backyard, which is not a term that we Latin Americans particularly like, but I think we all understand what it means. And part of that agenda is getting rid of the UNASUR, which is a real shame because, as you said, the UNASUR was a real integration project. In the boldest and in the kind of most integral of senses. Yes, it did mirror in many ways the European Union, because it wasn't either just.
So essentially, what we're setting up for is the whole issue of what UNASUR does and what was its function. And in many ways, there have been regional bodies in the past that have brought Latin America together in a, I wouldn't say a cohesive bloc, but in order to discuss issues in a more organized setting. The Organization of American States. There is the Andean, what do you call it? I think it's not the Andean Parliament, but it's the Andean Union, which is more in South America. There's a Central American Parliament. So there are other bodies. Now, the OAS, the Organization of American States, which does include the U.S. and I think it includes Canada as well, is not very popular among Latin Americans, especially in the Latin American left. But I wouldn't say that it's especially respected among Latin Americans because, of course, the U.S. does have disproportionate economic influence in Latin America if you take North and South America as a whole, because the U.S. has military bases in the Caribbean. The U.S. has probably the largest. It has, of course, the largest economy in the Americas for sure. And they've at times controlled parts of Latin America, including the Panama Canal. And I've had disagreements with people who are, even considered liberal and to the left of me, where they say, well, we should have maintained control of the Panama Canal. So, and I would say at a certain point, you have to let Panama live on its own. But the idea that they're proposing here with UNASUR, and I really glossed over it on Friday. I kind of went really superficial on it on Friday, just to introduce the topic. I probably should have just waited to today. We can still check out that video. UNASUR effectively means the integration of Latin America into a regional government that would, so to speak, override the local desires of the population. And that's a policy that I disagree with, whether you're talking about a progressive government or a right-wing government, whatever you want to call it. Either way, it sounds to me more like the beginning of tyranny. The more devolution you give to a subsidiary state, the better I believe that they're able to adapt to reality and solve their own problems. That's why the British Commonwealth has been in many ways more of a success than the British Empire, because you give more rights and liberties to the local countries to the extent that, it's not as if the British retaliated when India decided to renounce the Queen, when Ireland decided to renounce the Queen, when, you can pick any of these countries that have become constitutional republics. Guyana, which is right next to Venezuela. I believe Guyana doesn't recognize the Queen anymore as the head of state. So the British Commonwealth, whatever you think about England and the rest of Britain itself, has been a better way to resolve disputes between different countries within the same framework. In that case, the English-speaking world. UNASUR is trying to do the exact opposite. UNASUR is saying, well, we want to create kind of a uniform continental policy in order to create a new order that will create this super state across all of South America. And that's basically what they're saying. The only part of South America that was not a part of UNASUR at all was French Guiana, which of course is literally a part of France.
A commercial kind of free trade zone, or a political agreement, or an area of governance. It was all of those things and much more. It has a parliament, which was going just like the European Union has a parliament, which was going to be physically based in Bolivia. It had a secretary general with a strong executive there, which, as you said, was going to be in Ecuador. It was a really very important.
So notice what he mentions: a strong executive situated in Ecuador, which happened to be the country where he serves. And to put a finer point on it, whoops, this was some crap I was doing for somebody earlier. Sorry about that. Anyway, Guillaume Long, this is the gentleman in this video. Okay, so he was not even born in Ecuador. He's a French person, French/British. He went to the University of London, and then he first went to Latin America at the age of 18 and spent some extended time traveling in Central America before arriving in Ecuador in 1996. Let's see if maybe we get an article that's a little more. It's all in fucking French. What do you want from me? You're gonna blame me for using Wikipedia? I'm not gonna. I mean, the French just stole an entire World Cup by using players from other countries. So you think I'm gonna use their goddamn articles? Froggy bastards. So this is a person never lived in. He's not a Latin American, but he's trying to promote a regional supranational body in Latin America the same way that it has been in Europe. There's a person who's not, he's not, first of all, he's not from Latin America. Apparently, he's not even married to somebody from Latin America. So he became foreign minister there in March 2016. And he'd already been one of the people who, he'd been one of the main domestic policy people there. He was the Minister of Culture and Heritage. And, he had a bunch. I mean, that's a bullshit title wherever it is. Who needs a Minister of Culture and Heritage? I mean, isn't culture inherent in the people? Do you need somebody at the state level to coordinate culture? So he's a member of the PAIS Alliance, which is the socialist political movement that was basically led by Rafael Correa, who was the president of Ecuador up until 2017. And basically he starts up with a number of crises. There was a earthquake in 2016, and then there were a number of tensions between Venezuela and a number of these other countries that are within UNASUR. So basically, what has happened is that Ecuador, since Correa was basically retired and has been replaced by, the newly elected president, whose name is Lenin Moreno. His name is Lenin. They've drifted further from the left. Ironically, under a person named Lenin, they have drifted further away from the left. But to be honest with you, Ecuador has had a positive impact on some of the issues in Latin America. For example, peace talks in Colombia. I wouldn't say that Colombia should continue to be at war forever just because I disagree with the rebels. I think that it was worthy to attempt a peace between them. Let me see what the chat's saying here. We have Arjun says France had a really secular multicultural team in FIFA 2018. That's why they won. Abe Pinochet is the Minister of Penis and Vagina and Sexual Activities. Yeah, you guys are really paying attention. I mean, you're on your toes today. I'd like to hear Pinochet's take on that. Friday was grape drink live stream, eh? Yeah, I think I actually did it after I woke up from a brief nap. So you could say that. I don't drink grape soda, but if it makes you think it was, if it gives me an excuse, let's say I do. Yeah, I don't know what the hell you guys are talking about. By the way, Lightning number 116 is our former friend. He's still our friend, but he's the formerly known as Jeffrey. So welcome him to the channel. So this is a person who, he starts to really clash with the United States. And he becomes the chair of this Group of 77, which is a coalition of developing nations in Latin America. Okay, you can see this is the map of them. And he was basically trying to create a third world left-wing bloc to support basically confrontation with the United States. But instead of getting a promotion, he basically got kicked downstairs. It says Long was also in charge of Ecuador's oil negotiations within OPEC, and because, by the way, Ecuador is a major. It's not major, but it does have oil production. That's pretty significant for a country of its small population. So he represented Ecuador at the OPEC meetings in Algiers on September 29th, 2016, and in Vienna on November 30th, 2016, and what is this? The December 10th, 2016 OPEC, non-OPEC meeting in Vienna that resulted in the commitment to cut oil production by just under 1.8 million barrels a day. After the election of Donald Trump in the United States and the threat of an increase in the deportations of Ecuadorians, Long also implemented a contingency plan in support of Ecuadorian migrants. Let's check that out. So this is from FA. I'm not sure where I think FA is from Spain. So it says here Ecuador has implemented a contingency plan on the consular level on the counseling level in order to defend the rights of Ecuadorian migrants in the U.S., said today the Chancellor Guillaume Long, or the minister. In a communique, the Foreign Ministry has said it was taken in order to confront the declarations of the President of the U.S., Donald Trump. If hard times are coming, the government of the civilian revolution, the Foreign Ministry, which today is called the Ministry of Foreign Relations and Human Mobility, meaning the Ministry of Migrants, is going to take off, or basically, it's going to launch a series of actions in order to defend the interests of our migrants, says Long. The plan includes publishing the schedules of the consulates in the USA, a 1-800 number in the US, legal counseling, I guess a mobile consulate, disseminating the rights and the rights and services and other benefits for our migrants that should know their rights and will feel that their government protects them. So he's basically caring for the Ecuadorian migrants in the United States, which, I think I have kind of a two-way feeling about this. On the one hand, you can't blame people even if you disagree with Guillaume Long. Forget he's French because he's supposed to be the foreign minister of Ecuador. But you can't blame a government for trying to look after the welfare of its citizens in the diaspora, wherever it might be. On the other hand, you can't also claim that you're looking after their welfare abroad when obviously they left your country for a reason. If it was so good in your country, they probably wouldn't have migrated. He added that during his most recent visit to the USA, he had a number of meetings with several organizations of lawyers and groups that defend the migrants of the country, in this country, all of which are planning similar actions. So what does this mean? Does this mean that those organizations that met with him are guilty of collusion with Ecuador? Should they be under indictment from the FBI? Because that sounds like collusion to me, because they're basically cooperating on the same goal. I'm actually joking, of course, because legally there's no reason at the moment there's no reason to say, oh, this is illegal. Until it's illegal, I don't care. Should it be illegal? I guess, you guys can decide. I personally don't care either way, because I don't think it's going to be effective. I think that the courts here in the U.S. would probably overrule whoever is trying to, implement these ridiculous policies where other countries basically say we can fuck our own citizens over at home, and then when they move to other countries, we make it as hard as possible for the American government to deport them, so we have to deal with them again. This is no knock against any migrants from Ecuador or from El Salvador that are not doing anything violent or antisocial here, but if you came here illegally, if you came here illegally, if you felt the compelled to leave your country and illegally migrate to our country, it's a sign. I'm just saying that your country might not have its house in order. And I've worked with people from some countries, including Ecuador, but also including Central America and other parts of South America, that have said that their countries are run in many cases by assholes. It's not a knock against the people who live there. It's not. I mean, I discuss with people. I think Arjun is in the chat, and he criticizes the Indian government all the time, and nobody calls him anti-Indian. What is Rausch just gonna say? Shots fired. Messy shelves. Yeah, I'm really feeling the messy shelf insult. I think Sadiq Khan was insulting my messy shelf yesterday, calling into my friend Anthony Logan, the mayor of London, really punching down. By the way, people with messy shelves, you can actually tell that they read their own books. So that's something. I bet you clean bookshelf people, you probably never opened a single page. So that's my response to that. Fortunately, in the case of Ecuador, the majority of our migrant population are among those that are called sanctuary states, which is to say states that are willing to get into a conflict with the federal government of President Trump because they don't want to deport our migrants. So here you have a foreign leader, at least on the ministerial level, claiming, "Oh, we're going to support our migrants, and it's good that they live in sanctuary states where we can't have them, they can't be deported." So this is a person who's trying to say, "Oh, South America, they have to unite in order to fight the United States. But by the way, if you deport our people back so that we have to take care of them, that means that you're the bad guy. That means that you're evil." The leader of the Ecuadorian diplomacy has declared that he will confront the immigration situation in the United States. It is necessary, the unity. Okay, so he's saying that it's necessary to have unity and Latin American integration, such as the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, the CELAC, which is a different body, which is similar to UNASUR, which is it's much larger. It includes the Caribbean and not just South America. CELAC has the responsibility, above all today, to confront the difficult situation with the United States. And a new administration with a hardline position against the migrants of Ecuador and of the world, commented Long, according to a communique with the agency. So this was in January 2017, and so that's January 29th, 2017. And a few months later, he was kicked out of his office by the new president, Lenin Moreno. He was basically replaced. It says here, the new president of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, named Long the permanent representative of Ecuador to the United Nations. Long's stint at the head of the diplomatic mission is mostly marked by his leadership of the working group on the elaboration of a treaty on transnational corporations and human rights, a subject on which he is actively involved. In January 2018, Long resigned from his position in a public letter to Moreno in which he denounced the new government as unconstitutional measures and its betrayal of the ideals and programs of the citizens' revolution on which the new government was elected. So let's look at that. This is from Telesur. Let's look at Telesur. Let's see if their Spanish is better than their English. You know, this is getting into a real deep dive, but why not? Let's see here. I don't know why this is not loading. Bold, I was speaking of the two ass clowns that you tried to have a chat with, maybe. Hold on. I'm not sure what the hell Jeffrey is talking about. Magic Johnson cough. He's trying to say I have AIDS. He's starting to go cross-eyed through those blue lenses. Also seen his eyes turn into those reptilian ones a couple of times. He's Illuminati. I knew about that bookshelf. Yeah, that, I mean, David Icke, he never has a bookshelf in his background. Where was the... Ryu Shiska's still with the lame bagel jokes that make no sense. I have no clue what that even is supposed to mean. Cool. What the hell are you guys talking about there? This chat is really... I mean, I've seen some off-topic chats, and I still get surprised that mine can get as bad. Okay, number 80 and Alex. Well, what were you asking about? I was speaking of the two ass clowns. Huh? All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for not... I don't know why you guys are talking about bagels and number 80 right now, because I really don't... Actually, I was fighting with number 80 on Facebook. Well, not quite fighting with him, but we'll see. We'll see. Maybe later a fight will develop because he criticized something I posted. So you might get an extra helping of him, Jeffrey. He might come on later. Okay, so this is about Guillaume Long's resignation due to the authoritarianism of Lenin Moreno, the former foreign minister. Expressed his worry about the direction. Shut the fuck up. Of that his country has taken, and reassured that he refuses to be complicit in the dangerous authoritarianism and the false ecumenicalism, which means the desire of Moreno to become more I guess conciliatory, and the spirit of dialogue that is presently colonizing aggressively Ecuador. The ambassador of Ecuador to the United Nations in Geneva, Guillaume Long, announced this Thursday his resignation of the post due to the authoritarianism of the government of the Ecuadorian president, Lenin Moreno, and due to his disagreement of the whatever the hell happened on February 4th, which he called unconstitutional. What happened on February 4th? Let me see here. I think that might have been the election of Lenin Moreno. So he won the election in April 2017. Now, what happened on February 4th? You see here. I think that might have been the first round of the election. No, I'm wrong. What the hell? Well, we don't know what it is. So we'll have to figure that out later. So this was on January 4th. Well, that's whatever came up on February 4th, 2018. So we'll just search for it now. We'll get back to the video soon. I know you guys are really anxious to get back to the topic, but I know you guys are really focused there in the chat, even though I'm not looking at you. But I like to actually check my facts. So this was when Lenin Moreno basically affirmed that Rafael Correa could not run again for president because he upheld the term limit. So Ecuadorians on Sunday voted to prevent presidents from holding more than 2 terms in office, according to the Elections Council, a win for President Lenin Moreno that blocks his mentor turned adversary Rafael Correa from returning to power. The results from the referendum called by Moreno roll back a measure Correa pushed through Congress in 2015 to allow unlimited presidential re-election. The victory of the yes vote opens the path for us to work together. Confrontation is a thing of the past, Moreno said in a televised broadcast, in apparent reference to Correa's famously combative style. The old politicians will not return. Moreno may now be emboldened to remove Correa allies from key government posts, and financial markets will likely see the result as confirming a more politically and fiscally conservative future for the South American oil exporting country. The Elections Council said some 64% of voters had supported changing the re-election rules, while 36% of voters were opposed. So let's see if we can get that referendum. Let's see here. And this is ironic because Guillaume Long is trying to say it's unconstitutional and dictatorial for somebody to call for term limits in the presidential election. How does that even make sense? It says here, do you agree that the Constitution be amended to sanction any person convicted of acts of corruption with their inability to participate in political life and with the loss of their property as stated in Annex 1? Question 2. So that question, that would be, so that one passed by a yes vote of 73%. So that might also not be good for Correa, depending on the trial he's going through. Question 2. To guarantee the principle of alternation, do you agree to amend the Constitution of the Republic of Ecuador so that all the authorities of popular election can be re-elected once for the same office, recovering the mandate of the Constitution of Montecristi and leaving without effect the indefinite re-election approved by amendment by the National Assembly on December 3rd? So they basically repealed an amendment made by Correa allowing him to run unlimited times. Do you agree to amend the Constitution of the Republic of Ecuador to restructure the Council of Citizen Participation and Social Control, as well as to terminate the constitutional term of its current members, and that the council that transitorily assumes its functions has the power to evaluate the performance of the authorities whose designation corresponds to it, being able, if the case, to anticipate the termination of their periods? I don't know what that even means. So those were a number of other questions, but they all passed. All of these amendments passed. So the fourth one was, do you agree to amend the Constitution so that sexual crimes against children and adolescents never prescribe, according to Annex 4? So I'm not sure what that does. Hopefully it makes it illegal to be a pedophile instead of not illegal. Because if it makes it legal, then that's a bit fucked up, Ecuador. And the seventh one, do you agree to increase the intangible zone by at least 50,000 hectares and reduce the area of oil exploitation authorized by the National Assembly in the Yasuni National Park from 1,030 hectares to 300 hectares? So this is a person they're complaining about who's reducing oil drilling in the Amazon. This is the left complaining about this piece of shit, these pieces of shit, this Guillaume Long. Who permitted them to drill in the Amazon? Which, by the way, I think is a bad idea That's just me, but apparently other people think so too. The left did. What's his name? Rafael Correa did. I found out to have a 24/7 live chat, set another live stream time for tomorrow, and this chat will roll right into the other one. Do that, and I'll bring all sorts of people in. You know, um, Jeffrey Lightning, Jeff Lightning. I know that you can do that, and I might just do it. There's a way to do it that's really simple, and I'm fine with doing that. I just don't know if it's really necessary. I mean, it's a good idea, and I think Larry actually proposed it one time. I don't know where he is today. But in any case, he's asking, y'all talking about Abby Martin. Yeah, Abby Martin. I mean, let's not just single out Abby Martin. I mean, Abby Martin, to be fair, is not the only person who does this. Everybody knows my feelings about her, but she's not the only person who basically does not does not practice actual journalism. She practices opinion journalism. And when I try to give an opinion, I try to make it clear and where I distinguish it from what I think is the news. And I think for example here, it's a bad idea to drill in the Amazon. This is an environment that is very difficult to restore. There could be a lot of people or a lot of species, I'm sorry, that have their habitats irreversibly destroyed. I think I disagree with Arjun on that one. I think he's fine with it. But people on the left typically claim that they're the ones who stand up for the environment and conservation. I'm sorry, but it's not. I think that anybody who believes that the conservation of wildlife and plant life as well, it shouldn't be tied to one political position. There. And to be honest with you, it's one of the reasons I think it's difficult to subscribe to the Republican Party. They're oil friendly. They're really married to the oil lobby. And people who can't admit that, I think, have a blind spot. So I see Jeff is still fighting with Ryu and Pinochet. Pinochet says, I'm pretty sure it was the Clintons' Canadian friend that required the drilling rights in the Amazon bowl. Well, if you know something about that, please send me an email about it because I can't do it now. Of course, I have also the Hillary coughs because of them, so they're guilty of more crimes than that. Let's go back to we can't get too far in the weeds on this telesur crap. Let's go back to this video.
And I would say the first real strong integration mechanism. Mercosur played a role, the Andean community played a role, but nothing with the same vision and the same kind of holistic vision that the UNASUR had for the South American continent. And it wasn't supposed to be partisan. The idea was that you could be had different political tendency. In fact, we did have governments of different political tendency, and kind of believe in integration as a very important way of asserting the South American continent in the world platform, in the world scene, to act much more united, to integrate our economies, to create all sorts of things that would make us stronger and more sovereign, because for primary economies, for economies that are essentially based on raw materials and compete against each other, this process of kind of competing against each other in race to the bottom is bad. It's bad economically, and it's bad in terms of sovereignty. It means we're more...
It's bad. It's bad. The race to the bottom is bad. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but the economy under Rafael Correa wasn't necessarily great for all Ecuadorians. And to tell you the truth, the reason that people call this a race to the bottom is because there's a tradition in South America. There's a tradition not just in South America. To some extent, it even extends into our own country, where people once in power, whether you call them left wing, whether you call them, let's talk what a left wing person is. The person that supports quote unquote workers' rights, person who supports let's say a bigger social role in the economy and you know, there's a certain spectrum to that. So, and then you go to the right wing, there's people who believe in the opposite. You know, some people believe in bigger church involvement in the social sphere. That would be the right wing authoritarians more, or or there's people who believe in less state involvement in the economy. So there's a wide variety of those things. Now in South America, you have a lot of these countries where it doesn't matter what side of the spectrum gets into power. They just don't respect the liberties of the private citizen. So you can get governments like in Peru, where you have a left-wing government that's oppressing the people, you have a right-wing government oppressing the people. You have a left-wing government that that engages in systematic corruption. You have a right-wing government that engages in systematic corruption. We can throw these labels on ourselves and claim that we support workers' rights or we support individual liberty, and yet in our actual actions, you just don't do it. And that's very, very common in Latin America, and not only in Latin America, but like I said, it's much more useful to talk about these phenomena in that part of the world rather than the Middle East, where there's a lot of other factors that are more blatant and stick out a lot more. You know, sorry to be redundant there, but in the Middle East, a lot of the issues of religion, class, ethnicity, you could say, you know, alliances, you know, global alliances, those things cloud over the real issues of corruption and public policy that transcend political labels.
More vulnerable, and it's easier for great powers like the United States to divide and rule. So the UNASUR was a great project. Unfortunately, not everybody's understood that, and I think the elites that are back in power in many countries are on a real mission of real revenge against these progressive governments that dared to change the status quo, redistribute a little bit of wealth, and and diversify relations, and start kind of trading and talking to different partners, the BRICS, so on and so forth. And they're on a mission to destroy all this legacy. And one of these things that they're destroying, unfortunately, is the UNASUR. You mentioned.
So let's talk a little about that legacy that he's talking about. And he even mentioned specifically the BRICS. What the fuck are you putting in there, Ryu? Putting in links doesn't even tell me what they are. What if it was like just porn or something? You didn't get me this time, buddy. If you have any links, send it to my email. I'm not, or don't even do that. Just tell me what to look for, and I'll look it up. Trying to get me to open up midget porn on my live stream. So let's see, China, Ecuador, oil. You just have to type it. I mean, it's right here. Ecuador seeks renegotiation of China oil sales and loans. This happened to be on October 24, 2017. Ecuador is seeking to renegotiate oil deals with Chinese firms to get higher prices for its crude exports and reduce the amount it has to send the Asian giant. The head of state-owned Petroecuador, Byron Ojeda, said on Tuesday. That's a cool name, Byron Ojeda. OPEC member Ecuador has shipped around half of its oil to Chinese firms after a rash of oil for loans deals signed under former President Rafael Correa, who touted the deals as a triumph of trade between close allies. But critics have long said this cash-strapped government's dependence on loans with increasingly onerous terms has hurt Petroecuador's competitiveness, damaged transparency in an oil industry that accounts for half of Ecuador's exports. Where have we seen this before? I don't know. Where have we ever seen a state oil monopoly basically running buck wild and indebting itself to China? You know what? Maybe it's never happened before. Maybe I'm imagining something. That's good fucking coffee. Petroecuador has 7 contracts with Chinese companies. PetroChina Company Limited, which is state-owned, and Unipec, the trading unit for giant Sinopec Corporation. It also has one with Thailand's PTT International. Now, I want to make something clear here. I don't have any problem with China trading with Latin America. I'm just saying it's a bad strategy on the part of Latin America, because China has much more negotiating leverage. China can basically throw a lot of goodies your way, and you get addicted to it. That's exactly what happened in Ecuador. That's exactly. I mean, I think it had to happen in other countries. Can somebody think of a different country where this might have happened? The Hillary is strong within me today. The three companies have extended a total of about $5.3 billion to Ecuador under Correa, Ojeda said on Tuesday, adding Petroecuador still had to ship to them a total of 500 million barrels of oil through to 2024. Under new president Lenin Moreno, who has broken with his former mentor Correa, Ecuador will seek to change the formula that calculates sales prices in what Ojeda said were inadequate contracts with China. They also want to reduce the amount of oil Ecuador has to send to Beijing to allow it to sell it on the market at a better price. The conversations have started, said Ojeda, adding that in the meantime, shipments will proceed as planned. But Ojeda said Chinese executives have preliminarily said they were not keen on the proposal because it would revalue Ecuadorian crude. Should a contract not be reached, Petroecuador would mull paying debt early or renegotiation of conditions. Yeah, that could end up being painful for Ecuador too. So let's not forget, in Ecuador's efforts to get over this real problem caused by accumulating a lot of debt to China, they may create an unstable revolution in their own backyard, which it could jar them back to the left. I mean, it could jar them back to Korea. It could be a really painful process for Ecuador because of the huge debt, not to the United States, to China. And by the way, people always will try to, and that's why I say this almost every time. People will always try to claim that you're being xenophobic when you criticize any country, whether it's Russia or China. Criticizing a country doesn't mean you want a war with them. It doesn't mean you want them to basically dry up and die. But it's assessing realistically what the effect of their policies, the bilateral policies, have on their partners. So, this was China getting a really sweet deal for themselves, and they're not the only country that has fallen for that type of deal, meaning Ecuador. PetroChina and Sinopec did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Critics say the problem highlights how China's aggressive quest for foreign oil has left some small, poor countries trapped in unfavorable contracts that preclude them from benefiting from their natural resources. Petroecuador also will start with PTT International, which has similar contracts as its Chinese counterparts next month. So I want people to understand the United States has done similar things to other countries in the past, getting them deep into debt to the U.S. and then basically reeling them in like a fish. So this is a tactic that America has used in the past. Ecuador has fallen victim to it with the United States as well, but now they're falling victim to it with China. Yet this Guillaume Long is trying to make the case that it was a good thing that this happened with them. Well, we'll see what other good things he thinks happened that not everybody agrees with. Let's get that video back. If you're experiencing interruptions, it's because my computer is wigging out. Wow, that sucks. Let me read the chat for a second. Did I lose connection? Let me see here. I hope I didn't lose connection.
In 6 countries, I think they've used the pretext of an absence of the Secretary General to at least temporarily kind of withdraw from the UNASUR and kind of say, well, we'll go back to the UNASUR if you find a Secretary General. I think they did it also right when Bolivia, which is one of the progressive governments left in South America, was assuming the position of, well, was taking on the presidency, was receiving the presidency from the hands of Argentina. So I think the timing was also a sort of sabotage of the Bolivian presidency of UNASUR. But yeah, I mean, the urgency is to find a Secretary General to take away that pretext. And here I think all parties should be flexible, including progressive parties, including Bolivia, Venezuela, who should understand that maybe they're not a majority now and we need a Secretary General because clearly the lesser of evils is to have a Secretary General and rather not to have one and not to have an UNASUR. But I think there is a clear political agenda behind the weakening of the UNASUR.
Let's turn to the role also now of Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno in all of this. He came into office promising to deepen what his predecessor, Rafael Correa, called the Citizens' Revolution. Is he abandoning this integration project now? And if so, why? I mean, what do you think is behind Moreno's effort to take over the building? I mean, is this really a rejection of integration on the part of Moreno?
So to be clear, they're pissed off that the president of Ecuador is reallocating the building that was meant for UNASUR, that I guess Ecuador, I think, funded entirely, that was supposed to go for basically the president of all of South America, and he's giving them to a bunch of Indians who, they have an assembly. And I think it's a good question why they would deserve it specifically. I don't think it's really something we should care about, because after all, it's their money and they can do whatever they want with it. But look at the butthurt here from this freeze frame, of course, was taken arbitrarily, but look at the butthurt from these people over losing a building that was supposed to go to the president of South America when all of these countries withdrew from UNASUR.
Yeah, I mean, he came, as you said, he came on a platform that was a progressive platform, and actually in his electoral program, in the documents that he was circulating in order to be elected, which is important in Ecuadorian law. If you're in breach of the things that you offer, the promises that you make, there can be all sorts of process. I mean, it can go all the way to an impeachment. I don't think these things happen lightly, but certainly it has a certain legal value and a legal weight. The kind of things that you're elected on, they're serious. And one of the things that he promised was to continue and to fight for UNASUR. And now we're seeing him really weakening the UNASUR. He's basically said terrible things about the UNASUR, denigrating it over the last few days. And now he's offering to hand...
Oh my Lord, they're hurting UNASUR's opinion. Geez, I mean, how can they ever recover?
The very emblematic, symbolic building of the Secretary General of UNASUR.
This is, by the way, I didn't want to lead with this, but this is something I found out matter-of-factly. Lenin Moreno is the only world leader who basically gets around in a wheelchair. So they're pissed off that a man in a wheelchair, who is the duly elected president of Ecuador, is insulting their phony baloney international alliance,
which is just outside Quito. First, there was talks that he was going to recuperate it as a public building. Now he's talking of doing a university for the indigenous movement, which is handy because he needed the indigenous movement on board just a few days after the indigenous movement was showing signs of being critical of the latest neoliberal bill that Moreno has passed in Parliament. So having this kind of,
See, they got through 8 minutes in the video and they finally said the word neoliberal. So you know it's really the left. This is a picture of the guy as we shouldn't be laughing, but and I'm not laughing. I think it's, I don't know much about this guy, but he's a man who overcame a lot of I guess issues to be completely frank, and he's in a wheelchair and he became the president of Ecuador. So I just think these photos are kind of bizarre sometimes. This is the one I was kind of chuckling at because, they have him basically. This is literally a person who has all the power, but to a certain extent, you or I have more capabilities than him. He can never walk in his life. He has to be, the real question is how long he'll be able to maintain his the potency of his presidency, because eventually, when his term runs out, there will be people calling for him to be thrown out. And I think it's a good question whether Ecuador will ever have stability, since this is a left-wing president that has basically had to strike out on his own from his predecessor, who was also a leftist.
Clientelistic relationship back, whereby the government offers this tremendous building to the indigenous movement in exchange for their silence. It speaks very badly of the government. It also speaks quite badly of the indigenous movement, who's kind of playing that game and endangering the UNASUR. So yes, Ecuador is now one.
Let me go back on that one.
Yeah, a clientelistic relationship back, whereby the government offers this tremendous building to the indigenous movement in exchange for their silence. It speaks very badly of the government. It also speaks quite badly of the indigenous movement, who's kind of playing that game and endangering the UNASUR. So yes, Ecuador is now.
Oh God, I don't know how to reload this. This is a pop-up window. Let's see here. This will have to resolve itself. So in the meantime, I took the liberty of looking up
The indigenous movement, who's kind of playing that game and endangering the UNASUR. So yes, Ecuador is now.
Oh, not for long. Oh God, I don't know how to reload this. This is a pop-up window. Let's see here. Well, now we're hearing me. Okay, so. To go back to the traditional shitty window.
So having this kind of a clientelistic relationship back, whereby the government offers this tremendous building to the indigenous movement in exchange for their silence. It speaks very badly of the government. It also speaks quite badly of the indigenous movement, who's kind of playing that game and endangering the UNASUR. So yes,
So let's analyze that for a second, and I think I brought it up in the previous video from Friday. So let's analyze that for a second. He is griping that the president of Ecuador, who was duly elected in a democratic election, like him or hate him, he is on the left. I'm not going to say I like him. I'm not going to say that I have the right to tell the people of Ecuador who to elect, because it would be inconsistent. It's not the way I reacted to the. It's not the way I reacted to the election of AMLO over in Mexico, Lopez Obrador. So people have to keep a perspective here. He was duly elected in 2017, and we're going to have to accept that he's the president of Ecuador. And yet they're griping that he's taking the building that was supposed to be for a supranational body, UNASUR, and giving it to some indigenous tribes that have a federation of political influence.
Ecuador is now one of the countries that is going against UNASUR, endangering UNASUR. Maybe it's not a coincidence that this happened just a few days after Vice President Pence's visit to Quito. There's clearly a whole agenda of moving away from a progressive foreign policy to a much more kind of, sort of traditional inter-American bond with the United States, top-down sort of traditional Latin American relationship with the United States, and right-wing prerogatives in terms of foreign policy. So I think this is very sad, and I think it's very important that.
Yes, it's very sad you didn't get to keep your job with, basically a body that would have reduced Ecuador to basically a state within a larger union, exactly the way the European Union is.
The people of UNASUR fight for that legacy, it's the huge strategic importance of UNASUR to overcome the normal changes and shifts that happen in countries' politics. The opposition comes, and then the right wing comes, the left wing comes, and these are kind of part of the democratic game. But to endanger the integration of South America, which is so important for South America, I think is one of the strategic things that South America needs in order to achieve development and sovereignty, is, I think, irresponsible. And what a shame that Ecuador is now a part of that.
Just to conclude, I just want to turn briefly on the issue that you mentioned about CONAIE, because it's something that a lot of people are, I would say, perhaps a little bit unclear about what their role in Ecuadorian politics has been. Originally, I believe they supported Correa's election when he first ran, then turned against him, and then even supported the conservative or the right-wing candidate, Guillermo Lasso, against Moreno at one point. So in the election last year, or a year and a half ago. So tell us a little bit about CONAIE and the role it plays right now in Ecuador.
So they're done griping about Lenin Moreno himself. So they're going to complain now about the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, or CONAIE. And this is basically a group that has gone and it represented the interests of Indians, basically indigenous Indians in South America, especially in Ecuador. In 2013, CONAIE became more involved in discussions with other indigenous organizations involving land rights and environmental sustainability due to deals made by the government with large multinational oil companies. Who was the president in 2013? The Marxist Rafael Correa. These deals primarily concern the Amazon basin and would take over much of the indigenous land that is currently inhabited. There has been much debate for many years between the governments, the indigenous people, and the oil companies. Chevron, formerly Texaco, is a major oil company which has had a presence in Ecuador. Recently, Chevron has come into many Ecuadorian headlines regarding drilling rights that they are attempting to acquire. CONAIE has taken a stance against Chevron and their hope of drilling on indigenous land. So who did these Marxists, these supposed champions of the rights of the people, of the indigenous people, take the side of in this dispute? They didn't take the side of the Indians. They didn't take the side of the people who live on that land. They took the side of Chevron. Do you understand how bizarre that is? This is Amazon Watch, January 20th, 2014. It says Ecuador cracks down on indigenous leaders opposed to oil. Following the close of the 11th round oil auction on November 28, 2013, plainclothes officers in Quito, Ecuador, summarily closed the offices of Fundación Pachamama. Let's leave it to go. The Fundación Pachamama. In America, that I don't think they would get that far. A nonprofit that for 16 years has worked in defense of the rights of Amazonian indigenous peoples and the rights of nature. The dissolution, which the government blamed on their interference in public policy, was a retaliatory act that sought to repress Fundación Pachamama's legitimate right to disagree with the government's policies, such as the decision to turn over Amazonian indigenous peoples' land to oil companies. So this was Correa's government doing it. After attacking some of their closest allies, the Ecuadorian government is now attempting to take down Ecuador's indigenous leaders who are committed to defending their territory from any oil development plans by companies including PetroAmazonas, Andes Petroleum, ENAP, Belarus Neft. So even the it's not even Russia, it's Belarus that's getting involved there. So like Russia Junior and Repsol, which I think they're the ones that I'd heard of before, even though I'm not too familiar with this. The Secretary of Hydrocarbons has filed a formal complaint against 8 indigenous leaders who have dedicated their lives to defending the Amazon, including Franco Viteri, president of GAB.AI, the presidents of the Achuar and Sapara nationalities, the president and vice president of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, which is CONAIE, which is the organization he's talking about, and pioneering female leaders Patricia Gualinga from Sarayaku and Gloria Ushiwa of the Sapara. The complaint, which has led to a preliminary investigation by the Attorney General, accuses the leaders of the crime of making threats during protests against the oil auction on November 28th. Don't you fuck with our oil auction, bitches. These are people, by the way, in the American left. You know, I was somebody, I said at the time that the Dakota Access Pipeline should be resolved without violence. I said that these people who are protesting against the pipeline, you know, I don't know if they have legal standing, but it doesn't justify them being attacked with dogs and with tear gas and crap like that. And there were plenty of people on the right wing that said, you're being an idiot because they're just a bunch of wacko lefties. Well, I said, you know, even if the protesters themselves are, you know, many of them are not exactly the smartest people, you have this overwhelming attack on them. And this was at the time Obama was president too. So people forgive Obama for that. People forgive Obama for those massive infusions of police and sheriff's deputies, and I think at one point even police from other states into, where was it? I think it was in South Dakota. and the majority of the left didn't even care. The majority of the left didn't care at all, except for some of the people within the Bernie Sanders camp. Some of them. Okay, and I don't know if Lennon McCarthy remembers that, but I remember it very clearly. Let me see here. You guys are arguing about Russia and Belarus. Okay, but yeah, Lennon McCarthy, please let me know if you remember that, the Dakota Access Pipeline. So CONAIE issued a letter in response to that. And it says, today at a press conference with his governing council, Humberto Cholango, president of CONAIE, brought to light the Secretary of Hydrocarbons' denunciation of the events of November 28, 2013. Secretary Gustavo Andres Donoso's complaint has led to a preliminary investigation by the Attorney General against Cholango and Amazonian indigenous leaders. The complaint asks for the leaders to be imprisoned. In it, the Secretary requests that the Attorney General also investigate Bartolo Ushiwa, Vice President of CONAIE, Franco Viteri Gualinga, President of the governing body of the First Nations of the Ecuadorian Amazon, or GAB.AI, and several other leaders. The Attorney General will investigate the accusation of the crime of threatening, including 1, obstructing entry to buildings, 2, not having authorization for the public act, 3, impeding the opening of the envelopes from the oil auction, and 4, injuries. So a lot of the people will say, well, you don't criticize. I mean, the same people who will attack this, you know, attack these indigenous people in Latin America trying to get their land from being taken away to be used for oil pipelines and drilling, they will also say, well, we should be able to block ICE locations, attack ICE agents, attack police officers, do literally everything. Now, obstructing entry to buildings, I would agree, is probably a crime in most countries. Impeding the opening of the envelopes from the oil auction, you know, you could call that coercion. But not having authorization for the public act in the United States, you know, we have the right of freedom of association, freedom to publicly assemble. So in our country, and you know, as long as you're not creating a criminal conspiracy, meaning a conspiracy to commit a criminal act other than the assembly, you do have the right to meet together. CONAIE President Humberto Cholango stated that the government of Ecuador, through the Ministry of Hydrocarbons, continues to criminalize Ecuadorian indigenous leaders. He said, as president of CONAIE and especially as an Ecuadorian citizen, I am not going to evade justice. I'm going to face forward without hiding because my acts of struggle are transparent to the light of day and have not caused any damage to the state nor to any Ecuadorian or foreigner. The denunciation presented by the Secretary of Hydrocarbons, Gustavo Andres Donoso, seeks the penalty of prison. Lastly, Cholango noted that the prosecutor trying the case is Dr. Byron Granda, and that today at 3 p.m. Cholango will go with his lawyers to the Office of the Attorney General to sign the registry at the courthouse to begin defending himself from this unjust accusation. So this was in 2014, and this is the person in question, Humberto Cholango. And yet, this is Guillaume Long, who isn't even from Ecuador, is trying to say, oh, he's ruining everything. He's ruining our vision of a united Latin America. Well, what use is it to these Indians in South America if you're creating a united Latin America by paving over and drilling, his indigenous land, the land where his people come from, and they've never been anywhere else. And where are they supposed to go then? What are they supposed to do? They've never lived in any other. They don't want to live anywhere else. They don't want modernization. You can criticize their life choice. You can criticize their belief system. But when you start to claim that you're for the rights of indigenous people and then you sell them to oil companies, then I think that puts the onus on you to explain what your actions are.
Politics and in the Moreno government.
Yeah, well, the CONAIE, it's very sad because the CONAIE are the biggest indigenous movement in Ecuador, and they were a beacon of, I would say, one of the beacons of anti-neoliberal grassroots politics in Latin America in the 1990s. They were really an inspiration for all of us, the strongest indigenous movement in Latin America by far, and it was, they had a very sophisticated outlook and very critical of neoliberalism and very critical of U.S. imperialism and all sorts of, and they were a guiding force for the left. Unfortunately, it's been going on for a while now, since their alliance with Lucio Gutierrez, former president of Ecuador, who did very badly and betrayed them in the early 2000s. The CONAIE has been going downhill. They were never.
Well, let's review that for a second. I have to reload again.
Movement in Latin America by far, and it was, they had a very sophisticated outlook and very critical of neoliberalism and very critical of U.S. imperialism and all sorts of, and they were a guiding force for the left. Unfortunately, it's been going on for a while now, since their alliance with Lucio Gutierrez, former president of Ecuador, who did very badly and betrayed them in the early 2000s. The CONAIE has been going downhill. They were never really fully on board with Correa. Even in his first election, they refused. Correa asked them to have a vice presidential candidate. It wasn't going to be Lenín Moreno. It was going to be an indigenous leader from the CONAIE. They refused. They didn't really back him. It was only in the second round, in the runoff, that they went for what they probably, well, I think what even they called a lesser evil for Correa. So it was never really a strong. There were some then alliances during the constituent process, but it's never been an easy relationship. And
so essentially, he's okay with the CONAIE, with these indigenous Indians criticizing the neoliberals, but when it comes to criticizing the socialists, which by the way, under Correa, it got worse than ever before in terms of the oil drilling on indigenous lands. But, for him, what's more important is the betrayal that happened before Correa. What's more important for him is that you continue to push all the blame onto the quote-unquote neoliberals. No, there's no such thing as committing to an economic vision as the panacea for literally every problem. If I was to apply, libertarianism to environmental politics, it would probably clash with the way I think about, the relationship of humankind to, nature and wildlife. So you do have to deviate at certain times. There are certain things that the theory doesn't apply to literally everything. But for him, yes, it is. For him, it doesn't matter that these people were basically getting the shaft, and these are people. These are people. These are not wildlife. They're people who they've lived on this land for God knows how long. They just want to be left the fuck alone. They've never, and by the way, you notice that they haven't engaged in an armed resistance struggle and committed suicide bombings, unlike a certain other country that the real news likes to highlight. So therefore, the real news portrays them as the enemy of UNASUR, not as the people looking out for their own interests as a people.
Unfortunately, we've seen the CONAIE, the good elements of the CONAIE, which may be a strategic mistake, leaving the CONAIE, even joining the Korea government, the more sophisticated elements of the CONAIE and the more enlightened elements of the CONAIE joining the government, and then some really very sort of what we call ethnicists, almost xenophobic sectors, staying in the CONAIE, then being seriously permeated by foreign interests, I would say, to put it mildly, and maybe it's a...
Do you see how full of shit this person is? He isn't born in Ecuador. He basically came there in order to implement an economic vision that has nothing to do with Ecuador. In my opinion, the people of Ecuador can vote for whatever fucking system they want. They can vote to be socialist. They can vote to be, free market, neoliberal, whatever the hell you want to call it. Keynesian even. I'm not a supporter of Keynesian economics. But you have to respect their economic or their popular will. If they vote democratically, it's not our country. It's not America's country. It's also not UNASUR's country. They have the right to determine which vision they want for their country. Okay, that's the meaning of accepting the will of the popular vote. And Lenin Moreno was elected by popular vote in a 2-round election. And yet this asshole, who was not born in the country, who basically served for a couple of years as the foreign minister, is trying to dictate to people whose entire existence has occurred in Latin America, in Ecuador specifically, telling them, you're screwing up my international alliance, my one continent government. In order to save your land from oil exploitation, you must be some real selfish people. I mean, I can't believe I'm watching this.
Euphemism, and then eventually to back the hard right neoliberal candidate in the last presidential elections. The CONAIE supported him. And it's very, very sad because they were really a beacon of the left and they're clearly not anymore. So once again...
Yes, it's sad for the left because the left is the one who screwed them over. And they basically let Chevron, an American oil company, exploit their land. This is what's bizarre, that they think that because we, the United States, have oil companies, and they decided, we're just going to let your oil companies come in and we'll take the money and we'll distribute it so-called in a social way, but screw over the Indians. That's their vision of Latin America. That's how they look at Latin America on the left, that they have the right to implement these policies and actually betray their own vision by giving in to American oil companies who themselves are responsible for a lot of these issues. And then they blame the Indians for not supporting them anymore.
They're being manipulated, and this time it's very, very serious because they're a tool of the end, or what we hope isn't the end, but the serious threat against one of the most hopeful processes of the last 10 years, which this creation of this South American integration mechanism, the UNASUR, and I think they're co-responsible for its demise.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. I was speaking to Guillaume Long, former foreign...
All right, well, we're not going to be able to get through this without them asking for more money, so here goes.
Minister under Rafael Correa and former ambassador to the UN in Geneva under President Moreno. Thanks for having joined us today, Guillaume.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network. Also, as usual, I want to remind you that we're in the midst of our summer fundraiser and need your help to reach our goal of raising $200,000. Every dollar that you donate will be matched. Unlike practically all other news outlets, we do not accept support from governments or corporations. Please.
Yeah, that's actually a lie, and in a couple months, you'll know why that's a lie. You will. So let's set the table again before we might as well wrap up. You have here, this is the guy, you can see my cursor hovering over him, this Red Skull asshole, Gregory Wolpert, who is the wife, the wife. He's the husband of the Venezuelan ambassador to Ecuador. and he's talking to the former Marxist foreign minister of Ecuador, and they're trying to claim, oh, we're an independent news organization. No, you're not. You're not at all. You're promoting a vision for South America that's based on your vision, that it's based basically on your desire to turn South America into a Marxist continent. And it's not going well for you. By the way, it would be a little more credible if these were people who were actually Ecuadorian or actually Venezuelan. But you have a person who is, I think Greg Wilpert is German American, and the other guy, Lenin Moreno, is, or not Lenin Moreno, Guillaume Long is French and English. They immigrated to Latin America, and they're trying to promote their Marxist vision of Latin America for the entire continent at the expense of the people of Latin America. And that's not a vision for independence. It's not a vision for cooperation. It's a vision for domination. Domination by an economic model that they think is better for others, but that they themselves will not abide by. You'll notice they don't stay in Latin America after they get kicked out of power due to their ridiculous failures. Okay, it wasn't a coup that happened in Ecuador that got Guillaume Long out of power. They never fired him. He decided to resign because he had differences of opinion with Lenin Moreno, and yet it's not good enough for him. He has to call them authoritarians. What's authoritarian? You resigned. You know, he's bitching about UNASUR's building being given from UNASUR. Ecuador says, well, we built this this fabulous building, but it's not interesting enough for us to be part of UNASUR anymore. Since we're taking a new track, we're going to give it to an Indian coalition. Guillaume Long says, no, we need to give it to a large supranational body that's not accountable to the people. One that he specifically said, he said explicitly that it will be impervious to the changes in politics in Latin America. So that's basically what I have to say today. And we did do a deep dive. It's almost an hour and a half. So I want to say thank you to all the people who stayed, even though I'm not quite sure why you were interested. Yeah, some sort of bro game here. So you guys want me to set up that 24/7 chat? I can do that if you want. I can take a couple minutes to do that. I think I can do it. Let me see. So let me put this here. Yeah, I have no problem with you guys doing that. In my opinion, I don't see why you would want to do that as opposed to joining the Discord. But I mean, I guess it does make sense if you're saying, oh, I just want to stay on YouTube and chat. But if you join my Discord, you can also, it's easier for you to share links. It's easier for you to basically, do things that are, you can also chat with each other, and there's a live sound chat, so you can actually basically talk to each other live, by audio. You don't have to necessarily do text. But yeah, I'll set up a chat. Let me see here. What should I title this? So I'm just going to title this Monday Chat Bold Like a Leopard. And it'll be for, Monday the 16th at, let's put it for at 8 p.m. And I don't know if I'm going to actually do a stream then. So, if you get a notification for it, then, I'm not really, just be aware that it might not actually be a stream. So I'll send you the link right now. I'll put it in the chat. See here. So there you go, Jeffrey. Who's Lionel? Yeah, Lionel's a guy we also, some of us watch him. Pinochet says Discord sucks ass. Well, I mean, how effective is it the way you're doing it now, buddy? I mean, I'm just saying. I mean, I gave it to you, so you can either do that. You can here we go. You can either do the chat thing as Pinochet wants, which is fine. You know, I have no problem with it. Or you can join my Discord. I'll send you my Discord link in a second. And, you know, you can stay in touch. It's not just to stay in touch with me, because if you want to share links with me, if you want to do, suggest a collaboration or something. So it's easier to do that through Discord than through chat, because I'm not going to be observing the chat at all. For example, I'm not always at home. Sometimes I'm listening to some. I'm not actually as active on my channel as I was up until fairly recently. You know. A second. So before I leave today, you have the link to the chat for tomorrow. Will you be in the chat? I don't know. I mean, I have other shit to do too. I mean, I'll probably check in once in a while, but Lionel Nation is his YouTube channel. He's pretty popular. So yeah, Lionel Nation has a lot of other links, by the way. So it's not like he only depends on his chat. But if you guys want to use the chat, if that's the way you prefer to do it, I'm fine with it. I don't care. So I want to say thanks to everybody that stayed for the day. There was Ryu Shiska, of course, Len McCarthy, Lightning number 116, also known as Jeffrey, Arjun Sinha, Pinochet. Who else? Did I forget anybody? I think that might be all of you. I don't see anybody else. Revan Starkiller, I haven't heard from you in a while. I need you to send me an email. I sent you an email back because I want to discuss some stuff with Brazil. So I think that's everybody. And we'll close for the day. Maybe there'll be another chat later today. Maybe not. As always, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and comment below.